The Detroit Pistons have the most cap space this summer, but who should they spend that money on? We'll talk about that in just a moment.
Passing lane, skies a jam. Dynamite dunk and the crowd loves it.
Welcome back to Pistons Intellect. I'm your host, Jack Kelly. You can follow me on Twitter at Jack_Kelly_313. And you can also follow us over on Instagram at Pistons_Intellect. And as always, if you're feeling so kind, please hit that subscribe button. The channel continues to grow, and I appreciate everyone who's been tuning in the past couple of weeks. There's so much to discuss, and we're going to continue that today. So before we get to some free agents discussions, I just wanted to quickly hit on the latest kind of news for the Pistons, which was announced last Thursday, and that was Detroit reportedly hiring Pelicans GM Trajan Langdon, I should say, I will get this right, as the president of basketball operations. Now, since the announcement from Woj and James Edwards III of the Athletic later backed up that report on Thursday evening, nothing has been said from what I've seen from the Pistons officially announcing the signing, but we know that's happening. And now that we've had a few days to kind of think about it, we've had the weekend, I still remain optimistic with the hire. I guess my thoughts still are like, we need to see the draft. We need to see free agency. And not most importantly, but just as important as what happens with the roster and the draft, we need to see what Langdon is going to decide to do with, first of all, Troy Weaver, but also Monty Williams, which there was a report in James Edwards III's article on the Thursday kind of going through how the hiring took place, where it said that Tom Gores is not afraid to eat the remaining $60 million on Monty Williams' contract. I believe it's like 4 years, $60 million, something like that. If Langdon doesn't want Monty and wants to go find his own coach, then Tom Gores is willing to eat all that money. So we still haven't heard anything, as I just said, but I feel like that is going to be the next thing that happens. I feel like at least it kind of makes sense. Like, are the Pistons, like if you're not set on bringing Monty Williams back, you would think he'd be gone before the draft. Like, I think maybe Langdon at the moment is getting to know everyone, figuring out the organization. Like I said, it hasn't been officially announced, but I feel like we're going to know, at least before the draft, if Monty Williams is going to be the coach or not of this team. So very interesting. The Troy Weaver thing, he's still technically the GM, once again, similar to Monty. I think he still has another year on his deal. He got an extension, which at the time was a bit funny, but that extension he got last season or the season before last, it now looks just bizarre. But yeah, he still has like a season left. So, and I assume Tom Gores, if Troy Weaver has moved on or parts ways, Tom Gores will have no issues eating the remainder of that deal. So just wanted to hit that first of all. How are you feeling with the hire now? We've had probably 4 days to think about it. I'm still optimistic, but as I said in the last episode, it's going to take me this entire off season, as well as probably a fair chunk of next season, to really start to build faith in whoever's running the show for this Pistons team, because we're all excited about Troy Weaver. I was excited about the moves he made, at least in his first couple of drafts. Felt like from the Jalen Duren and Jaden Ivey draft, things have kind of just gone downhill from there. But prior to that, I was excited with the moves Troy was making, and I think we all were as a fan base, and thought he potentially was the guy, even though there was red flags along the way. Look, I say all that to just say it's going to take a while, I think, for Pistons fans to build trust in anyone in that front office, just because of the season they just had and pretty much the past 2 seasons. So even if, you were to tell me, like, even if Langdon does eventually being the guy that turns this all around with a new GM or with the current stuff, whatever, I think we're going to need to see a full season of it to start to rebuild that base. So moving on, bit light on news as I've just kind of gone through. So I thought the Pistons have the most cap space in the NBA this off season. they can get up to, I believe, around $64 million, which is the most of any team. And there's plenty of ways they can use that money. So the 3 to 4 players I'm about to go through for who are my kind of top free agents, that doesn't mean this is the absolute direction I want the Pistons to go. I spoke about it probably this time last week off the back of an article from James Edwards about the ways the Pistons can spend their money this summer and utilize that money to reshape the roster. Plenty of ways. There's trades. These are just if the Pistons do choose the path of spending a bulk of their cap on an unrestricted free agent, these are the 3 to 4 guys I think would help the Pistons the most next season and for the next couple of seasons while they try and put a functional roster around Cade Cunningham. So the first guy, and this is a player I think, this is who I think should be kind of number one of the unrestricted free agents on the list. The first player I want to talk about is Isaiah Hartenstein from the New York Knicks. Now, as you can see here, 26 years old, he's an unrestricted free agent. He's just come off 2 really successful seasons with the Knicks, 7 foot. This season, as you can see, 8 rebounds, 8 points, 2.5 assists, a steal, a block in only 25 minutes a game. I think he started like 30 odd games for the Knicks, played around 70 odd. He started, he was a backup behind Mitchell Robinson, but started a fair chunk of games because Robinson was out for a lot of the season with a foot injury. But what I love about Hartenstein is he's not only can he block a shot here and there, he's a really good positional defender, great rebounder. Like you saw in these playoffs against Joel Embiid and the 76ers. And then even in that Pacers series, like he really had a bit of a coming out party. He's been kind of like your NBA nerds' favorite backup center for a few seasons now, going back to when he was with the Clippers. I think he started with the Rockets 4 or 5 years ago, and he was in and out of their G League team, but he really found a nice role with the Clippers. And yeah, he signed with the Knicks 2 summers ago and really got a chance to shine in Tom Thibodeau's kind of defensive-oriented system. Back-to-back Eastern Conference semifinals appearance to the Knicks. And Isaiah Hartenstein, this is like those numbers there might not jump off the page to you, but I'm telling you they're really good. But if you want to get even more into the advanced numbers, the Knicks were plus 10 with him on the court. So that's on a team that finished, I think, 3rd in the East. They would have got to the Eastern Conference Finals this year, I feel like, if they didn't have so many injuries. But injuries happen. Like he was on a really good team, one of the best defensive teams, and he was a plus 10. And that's with other centers on the roster like Mitchell Robinson, who I knew was injured. But, when Hartenstein was on the court, like I think he was the Knicks' best big man. So the flip side of that is because of how good he was, it's going to be hard for the Pistons to get him. But where they might be in luck is, and this is what the Pistons are going to have to do for any of these guys I'm about to talk about. And I've got some numbers here for what these guys could be looking to fetch. But there's a report today that the Knicks plan to offer Hartenstein 4 years, $72 million. So basically that's $18 million a year for Hartenstein. Now, for a backup big, that sounds like a lot of money. But I think if you're Detroit, I think that's a fine amount. And they're going to have to pay more. I think to get Hartenstein out of New York and to Detroit, they'll have to pay more close around that $23, $24 million a year. So you're probably looking more at like, what's that, 4 years, 96 million would be about 24 annually. So that's a pretty big financial commitment to a center. But I think why I have faith in Hartenstein is not only is the defense good, the rebounding really solid. He's a good finisher around the rim. He's a good pick and roll player, but he can pass the ball. 2.5 assists in 25 minutes for a big man is pretty good. And he's very well known for his short roll passing, which is something that Jalen Duren was, showed promise as a rookie, but kind of tapered off this season. But yeah, I think he's just a winning player. He's in the prime of his career. And I also feel like if you're going to keep Jalen Duren, who still has 2 more years on his contract, Hartenstein is a guy that the contract at $24 million, Hartenstein is steep, But I feel like he's a guy that if, say, Jalen Duren, actually, you keep him on the roster and Duren develops really nicely in year 3 and 4, Duren might be ready to take that starting reign during his 4th season. Or he might just outplay, like, there's a world where he just becomes better than Hartenstein and you'll say, oh, well, Jack, you've got all this money now invested in your center position. But, ideally Hartenstein's play stays just as good and you could either trade Hartenstein, maybe another team throws you a massive offer for Jalen Duren. I still think there's some flexibility there. So maybe 24 million is a bit much, but I think just looking at these unrestricted free agents, like he would help this team immensely. And maybe he's your starting center of the future. Maybe, there's another big man on this list here that is of a similar mold. And I'll talk about how Asar Thompson can work with these kind of bigs that aren't known as shooters. But, maybe you just choose Hartenstein over Durant. But he's number 1 on my list. Number 2, I think this is a guy all Pistons fans have top of their list, and that's Malik Monk. And as you can see here, 26 years old, just entering the prime of his career, had an excellent 2 seasons with the Sacramento Kings. This past season was the best of his career. 15 points a game, 5 assists, which I think is a career high, 2.1 threes a game, 35% from 3, 44% field goal. So those shooting percentages there, I wouldn't be too concerned because he's a kind of a high volume guy, takes a lot of tough shots. The one thing I noticed when looking into his numbers was his isolation numbers were pretty inefficient. So I think that's he's a guy who took a lot of pull-up threes and that kind of thing. I think that's kind of reduced the percentages, but he's a knockdown shooter. Like he would fit alongside Cade as a starter, or if you're really worried about giving up too much defense from the backcourt, he's the best 6 man in the league. So, or one of, easily. He'd probably be the best bucket getter off the bench. And as you can see there, when he plays enough minutes, 15 points a night, 5 assists. He's going to cost a bit though. I think the Kings, I think he's a guy that's going to cost you around 25 mil a season once again. That's a lot of money for someone like that, but he's a shooter. So, he's number 2 on my list. It's a tricky one for me because when I think about fit, I think next to Cade, Malik Monk isn't necessarily the ideal 2 man to put alongside Cade. But I think at the same time, the Pistons have to just find players who have been on a winning team, who have produced at a high level. He's probably a bit undersized for me, but as I said, the Pistons aren't in a position right now, I feel like, to go and find the perfect 2 man to put alongside Cade. Sure, imagine if you could find a 27-year-old Paul George type, but that's just unrealistic to think that's going to happen. So I think he would be a great get, Malik Monk. You're probably going to have to pay a fair bit for him, but, if he can come in, give you, he probably averages more points than the Pistons. He can give you 15 to 20 points on those kind of shooting splits. 2.1 threes a game, doesn't sound like a lot when you look at it, but that would just be getting that every night would be invaluable for this team. And he's a guy teams would have to scheme for. He's a guy who would pull guys away from Cade. You don't leave Malik Monk open in the corner like you do Jaden Ivey. And then, he's a bit undersized, but he's still in the prime of his career, so you'd like to think he can kind of hold his own a little bit defensively if you're giving him the easiest matchup. So, that was number 2. I know a lot of Pistons fans love Malik Monk, so I can see the vision there for sure. It's just he's going to cost a fair bit, I feel like, because to get him out of Sacramento might be tough. But let me know your thoughts on him. Player number 3, I feel like I'm going to cop some heat for this. Now, there's Tobias Harris. I feel like he's a kind of, for Pistons fans, I feel like the perception around him is, from what I see at least, is kind of not really. I don't think people look at Tobias Harris through the lens they should be looking at him through as Pistons fans at times. I think people look at the playoff disappointments, the disappearing acts, or maybe a couple of stretches he's had in the regular season where you might say he's disappeared, but that's because he's on the Philadelphia 76ers, a team that's been trying to win a championship since he got there 4 seasons ago. He's been in the spotlight. That contract he signed for like 4 years, 160 million, did him no favors in the sense of the lens he was looked at through by general NBA media and fans. But the reason I have him on this list is because I think if, say, the Pistons don't, just say they come into free agency and they need to fill that starting four position. Like say that's priority number one. Say they draft Donovan Clingan and they say, we're going to go with Clingan and Durant at the 5. We're going to put a lot of stock in Clingan coming in and being able to play average NBA defense day one. We need a starting 4 who can help take the load off Cade. I think Tobias Harris is an excellent option. These numbers, 17 points, 6.5 boards, 3 assists, 35% from 3, 50% from the field, 6'8". Like, he's very durable, Tobias Harris. Like, he's just a known commodity. And I think if you sign him on like a 2-year, $60 million deal, I kind of don't have much of an issue with that. Now, maybe he sees this as kind of his last chance to get like a four-year kind of deal somewhere for significant money, and maybe 2 years isn't enough for him. But if the market for him is, say, 4 years, 60 to other contending teams, maybe the Pistons can say, we'll give you 60 in 2 years. And then you get another chance at 33 years old to go and get that final deal. Maybe that could persuade him to come here. He's been heavily linked with the Pistons. Like, when you look at betting sites, he's the top team most of the time for him to come to Detroit. So it's just betting odds, but he's been tied to the Pistons all summer. All season, feels like. So I just think he's a very serviceable four-man that on the right deal, like if you told me the Pistons committed for, like, I think a lot of Pistons fans, when they see his name, they think he's getting that deal that he got with Philadelphia, like 4 years, $160 million. Like that, I just cannot see that happening. Like, for me, like I said, high kind of salary, like 60 million, but it's only 2 years. It's all front ended. Like, you're not, well, I shouldn't even say front end, that's the wrong term, but you're just paying him a heap of money in a 1 or 2 year deal. And I think he would be a perfect kind of fit at the 4 to help this team next season. So just from like looking at this free agent class, say they go out and get Brandon Ingram, well then Tobias Harris isn't on the cards for me. But if we're just looking at free agency, say the Pistons, they need to fill that void at the 4 and they've got a heap of cash to do it. I think he's kind of the best option available. And I know some people say Miles Bridges, and that's their opinion. I don't, with what's kind of transpired with him off the court, some of the things that have happened in the Piston organization in the past couple of years, I just don't think that's a good match. But, I'm not going to argue that with people. That's just my stance on that one. But if there was a world where that didn't exist, of course, Miles Bridges, in terms of just him as the basketball player, would be a good option. But I think the baggage there, and with the baggage, it's some of the things that have happened in the Pistons organization the past 2 years. I just don't like that match at all. So that's my quick thoughts on that, because I know that one's going to come up in the comments. But go ahead, roast me for my Tobias Harris kind of love here. But that's my thoughts on it. I hope it makes some sense. Now, the fourth player here, I've got Nick Claxton. Now, I tossed between Nick Claxton and kind of like Gary Trent Jr. He would have been my next one, but I've got Claxton here because I'm just a huge believer in shooting. Obviously is a big issue, and I don't want to dismiss that. That's why I've had Malik Monk and Tobias Harris above Claxton. But just the Pistons' lack of interior defense has just killed this team. Like, the defense so often, and some people called me out for this during the season when I do my post-game recaps, and rightfully so. Like, so often we focus on the offense and spacing or lineups with, we're not doing enough around Cade, and that's fair. But when the defense and the defensive effort of this team, or this Pistons team last season, was just, you're not winning games. You're not winning games with that effort. Like, their rim protection was horrible. Obviously, Jalen Duran's an excellent rebounder, but just the pick and roll defense, slow. out of position. Like Isaiah Stewart tries his best, but he's just not big enough. Like I would still be very happy for Stu to be this team's long-term backup five, but he's not big enough to be a starting five. So I think that's just a fact. So that's why I have Claxton and Hartenstein both in my top four, because I think rim protection and defense at the five is everything. Like Nikola Jokic kind of defies this, but you need like a great, like if you're gonna even like be a playoff team, you need a good defensive five. Like look at like Vucevic, like Vuce, really solid, really good, skilled offensive player, but he just gives up so much defensively. I know those Magic teams made a couple of playoff runs, but they had like Jonathan Isaac, Aaron Gordon, like they had other really, really good defenders on that team to help kind of supplement the issues Vuce had defensively. And look how far they got. So basically, I say all that to say Nick Claxton, excellent shot blocker, good defender, good rebounder, good lob threat. He had probably his season before last was his real breakout season with the Nets. This season, the Nets as a whole kind of just fell off a cliff. But the season prior, he really broke out, averaging like 2.5 blocks, 12 points. Similar stats, but when you looked at his impact numbers, like the net rating and that kind of thing, like he was a huge boost for the Nets in the season before last. This season, this would be kind of a little bit of the concern with him is with kind of lesser talent on the team with this Nets team as opposed to the one the season before, which had Kevin Durant on it. The Nets were actually 7 points per 100 possessions better with Claxton off the floor this season. And that was with him being backed up by Day'Ron Sharpe and Brendan Watford. I think it should be Trenton Watford. Anyway, so that's a bit concerning. I'm not sure how much to attribute that to a coach change, lineup fluctuation, that Nets team just falling off a cliff, but it counts for something. And, you know, like I went and did some research on kind of the buzz around what contract he could be looking to sign, and Claxton's just come off a 2-year, $70 million contract, which I think was an extension from his original rookie deal. And I was reading on a Nets kind of blog site that a fair contract for the Nets to offer Claxton was around $22 million across 4 years. So 4 years, $88 million was what this Nets site kind of predicted for Nick Claxton. So this is another reason why I just had him a bit lower than Hartenstein, because whilst he's probably a bit better of a shot blocker, I think Hartenstein does the other stuff just as good or maybe a bit better. But I just think Hartenstein gives you a bit more flexibility offensively than Claxton. So I feel like for the Pistons to get Claxton, like they're going to have to go like 4 years, 100 million, something like that, which is a lot of money for a guy who's still, you know, like I just said, he had a really good season, the one before last, but this last off season was kind of stagnated a bit, and his impact didn't seem to carry over as much as it did on a lesser team, which gives me some pause for concern with the team if he's coming to a team like the Pistons on a big contract, because this was a contract year for him. So, but I still think he helps his team a lot. That's just kind of, I guess, in a way, I'm not trying to put him down as a player. I'm just saying why I kind of had him lower than Hartenstein. But still, I think would help this team a lot. So I think if you get Claxton, though, part of me feels like you're out fully on Durant. Whereas with Hartenstein, for some reason, I feel like he's more. Maybe Hartenstein would only come to Detroit with the promise of starting, but I feel like Hartenstein is a guy who's come off the bench his whole career, pretty much. Like he started, obviously, but he's a career backup big guy. I feel like he might be more accepting and willing to help, willing to play behind a guy like Durant if they're outperforming. Whereas Claxton, for some reason, maybe this is just a wrong assumption, it feels like if the Pistons go with him, I feel like he's their guy. So, they're kind of the top four unrestricted free agents. We had some of the other names are Miles Bridges, Gary Trent Jr. Oh man, who else? Jonas Valanciunas. That name's been thrown around a lot by James Edwards of The Athletic. I don't think there's much, like, I think he said it. There's not much reporting in that. It's just a guy he thinks could help this team tremendously. And Valanciunas, I almost put over Claxton. I just think Valanciunas will be excellent offensively, and I probably wouldn't have any issues with him being signed. Probably going to be cheaper than Claxton and Langdon at 32 years old, but it just, I don't know, had him just probably off the board. But a lot of these players like that I just all mentioned, like the Pistons could get 2 of those guys. And then make some smart trades. Like I think that's still a pretty decent summer. So, and keep their pick. But look, I don't want to go on for much longer. That's the 3 to 4 guys I've kind of just taken a look at today. Let me know your list. Who's your top 3 maybe? And yeah, till Friday, as always, go Pistons.